Hello, I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings, in which I read my writings in order to entertain you during our coronavirus nightmare. I've already read a couple of stories featuring Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet, in this series so far. I read William Did It, and then I did, in 3 parts, Ragnarok and Roll. The story I'm going to read for you right now is another tale of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet. It is the follow-up to Ragnarok and Roll. Ragnarok and Roll originally appeared in an anthology called Tales from the House Band, and the second story I did with her, well, technically the third, but the second one of her in Key West, appeared in Tales from the House Band, Volume 2. Both of which are published by Plus One Press, who then later published the first Cassie collection, Ragnarok and Roll, Tales of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet, and they will also be publishing the second collection, which will be called Ragnarok in a Hard Place. Not sure when it's going to be published because I still don't quite have enough stories to fill it yet, but I'm close. Anyway, I'm going to just start with the introduction to I Believe I'm Sinkin Down from Tales from the House Band Volume 2, which nicely sets the stage. Readers of Tales from the House Band Volume 1 will likely recall Ragnarok and Roll, in which a young woman named Cassie Zukav sees 1812, her favorite band on Key West, replaced at Mayor Fred's saloon by a crappier band. Is told by Odin, the Allfather of the Aesir, that she's one of the Disir, a fate goddess from Norse mythology, and has to cast a counterspell to keep Loki from destroying the world. In the end, the world stays alive, and 1812 is restored to their rightful place on Mayor Fred's stage, with Loki's estranged wife, Sinkin, as their new drummer. Nothing stays normal in Cassie's life, but nobody expects normal in Key West anyhow. Like most bands, 1812 is just looking for that ever-elusive big break, and they may just find it in the latest Cassie adventure, I Believe I'm Sinkin Down. My first thought upon entering Mayor Fred's saloon was that the crowd was fairly subdued for a Thursday night. Then I remembered that it was Saturday night. My confusion as to what day it was could, I think, be forgiven. See, I generally spend my Thursday through Sunday nights at Mayor Fred's, my favorite bar in Key West. Those are the 4 nights when 1812 plays. Like most bands on the island, they're a rock and roll cover band. But a particularly talented one, and they have become good friends of mine as well. Mayor Fred's, just off the main drag of Duval Street, and a short walk from the Bottroff House bed and breakfast where I worked part-time and also lived, was an open-air bar with a big ficus tree in the middle of it. Tourist websites will tell you that it was Key West's hanging tree in the 19th century. They will not tell you that it's also a root of Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse myth, a bit of trivia which I had learned the hard way when I had to stop a Norse god from destroying the world by sundering the ficus. The crowd was usually about 2/3 tourists, 1/3 regulars, but on Saturdays it was more 80-20 in favor of the tourists. I was later than usual because I'd been putting in a lot of extra time at my other job as a part-time dive master at Sea Cliffs, a dive shop on Stock Island. Lately, it had been more like full-time, since the 2 owners, Kara Zimmerman and Andy Wasserstein, were badly hurt when a UFO crashed into Dry Tortugas. Andy was still in the hospital, and Kara's arm was still broken, so Noah, the other part-timer, and I were running all the dives. It was the only way to keep the business going, and since they were responsible for the only actual income I made, the work at the Bottroff House was in exchange for room and board, it was the least I could do. Besides, they'd have had to close down otherwise. As a result, this was my first chance this week to make it to Mayor Fred's, and I was late. My usual table by the ficus was taken, so I just sidled up to the bar near the soundboard while the guitarist, Bobby Malewski, said, "We've got a request for this next one, and then we're going to take a little break." Chet started up a bass line, then the rest of the band came in, and I realized the song was Crossroads, the Eric Clapton song. Paulo Jimenez was running sound like usual. "What's up, Cassie? Why is it so quiet in here? Ain't you heard?" He glanced back down at the board, adjusting one of the levels. I didn't notice a difference, but he nodded as if the whole thing sounded infinitely more appealing now. "See that funny-looking dude over there?" Paulo had an artificial right hand, and he pointed with a prosthetic toward the corner near one of the speakers. I saw an African-American man wearing a ball cap with the Miami Dolphins logo on it. He also wore huge mirror shades and sported an impressive set of sideburns. "What, the 70s reject over there?" "Mm-hmm." As usual, Paolo made that into a 4-syllable sound. He was here last night, too, and we think it's JR. I blinked. Huh? Paolo stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You know! JR! Still not... John Robertson, girl! Don't you... I threw up my hands. Christ, Paolo, why didn't you just say that? When people referred to Michael Jackson as MJ, I never knew who they meant then, either. Looking back over at the corner, I saw that the guy definitely could have passed for Robertson. Robertson 30 years ago, anyhow. Come on, he's been around since the 60s. That guy's too young. But Paolo was shaking his head. Me and Gavin, back when we were a thing, we saw him at the Seminole Hard Rock up in Lauderdale. He was looking fine for a man his age. Shit, he was looking fine for a man half his age. Thinking about it, I remembered one time when he joined the Rolling Stones on stage a year or two ago. When I watched the clip on YouTube, Keith Richards and Mick Jagger both looked practically desiccated, while Robertson, who was supposed to be a couple of years older than them, looked great. Alright, so what's he doing here? The answer to that question had to wait, as 1812 hit the final note of Crossroads. Over the applause, which, despite the subdued nature of the crowd, was pretty enthusiastic, Bobby set her left-handed guitar onto its stand and walked up to her mic saying, "We're going to take a break. Be back in 20, so don't go away." Chet Smith put his bass on a stand next to Bobby's. Jana Neha and Ginny Blake stepped out from behind the keyboards and drum kit, respectively, and Paolo hit several buttons that muted the outputs on all the instruments and microphones. Jana, fishing a cigarette out of the pack in her pocket, headed straight outside. Chet went for the bathroom, but Ginny and Bobby came over to me at the bar. "Hey there, stranger," Bobby said. "Was wondering if you were going to make it." "You know what it's been like at C-Clips," I said. Bobby was one of our regular customers, after all. "Yeah, so Paolo fill you in about tall, dark, and mysterious over there?" "You think it's John Robertson?" "I'm sure it's John Robertson," Ginny said emphatically. "I met him once. It was a few decades ago, but I could never forget those cheekbones." Since Ginny was also a Norse god, the wife of the one that tried to destroy the world, I figured I'd take her word for it. Ihor, the bartender, finally materialized at that point. Bobby and I both ordered beers, and Ginny ordered her usual between sets bourbon. Bobby looked at me intently. "Okay, Cass, maybe you can break the tie. Jana and I think we should approach the guy, find out what he thinks of us. I mean, it's John fucking Robertson, and he's been here to see us twice now." Ginny rolled her eyes. "I think we should leave well enough alone. If he wishes to speak to us, he's had ample opportunity." "And Chet's on your side?" I asked Ginny. She shrugged, more or less. He said, "Yeah, fuck it," what she said after I explained my position. I couldn't help but grin. "So the woman who spent centuries catching poison in a bowl to keep her husband alive is preaching patience. Big surprise." Ginny just glowered at me. Her husband, Loki, had been so grateful for her assistance that he'd abandoned her as soon as he'd escaped the trap, and then tried to destroy the world. He was the one who had gone after the ficus until I stopped him with some help from Odin. Yeah, that Odin. "So what do you think, Cass?" Bobby asked. She was staring at me intently with her sea-blue eyes, hoping to cash in on our friendship to have me go her way. Thing was, I was more on Ginny and Chet's side on this one. Luckily, I didn't have to choose. I noticed movement behind them that made me smile. "Doesn't matter. Turn around." The man in question was approaching. He'd removed the ball cap and mirror shades, and now there was no doubt who he was. The wide nose, the flat smile. Not that it wasn't broad or pleasant, but his mouth had no curve to it at all, which was weird. And those intense, soulful brown eyes couldn't possibly have been anyone else. "Excuse me, but I was wondering if I could speak with y'all for a spell." That was all Bobby could muster as she openly gaped at the man. Ginny came to her rescue, holding out a hand. "Hello, I doubt you remember me, Mr. Robertson, but we met at the Fillmore a while back. I'm Ginny Blake." "I do not recall, I'm afraid, Miss Blake, and that is surely my loss. You're one fine-looking woman." And then he actually kissed her hand. "And please, y'all can call me Jack." While Ginny just smiled, Bobby gaped, making a few gurgling noises before finally managing to get a "Bobby! I'm Bobby Malevsky." He kissed her hand, too. "You play an out-of-sight guitar, Miss Malevsky." "Thank you. Coming from you, that means a great deal." Ihor brought the drinks over at that point, and Bobby grabbed her beer, gulping about half of it down in one shot. If he was bothered by this sudden display of alcoholism, Robertson didn't show it. He just said, "After y'all are through, maybe you can meet up with me at my hotel? I got me a business proposition." "For us?" Bobby was still gaping. "Well, it's past time I did me a follow-up to Diamonds in the Rough, and I parted ways with my last backup band. The songs I've been writing for the new one need a sound, and I think these last 2 nights, I found it." "Really? Where?" Bobby asked. I tried not to snarf my beer. I almost succeeded. Bobby, to her credit, realized right away how ridiculous she sounded. "I'm sorry, you meant us, didn't you?" "I did indeed." He gave her that flat smile again, just as Chet came out of the men's room, and Jaina came back in from her cigarette break. Jaina started. Robertson grabbed her hand and kissed it too. "Miss Neha, listening to your piano playing on Love, Rain, or Me, I was transfixed. And you pick yourself a mean mandolin." He looked at Chet, who held up both hands. "You ain't kissing my hand, yo." "Too right I ain't." He laughed. "I was really digging that bass line before Crossroad Blues." I frowned. "I thought it was just called Crossroads." Jaina stared at me derisively. "Yeah, when Clapton did it. The original was a great old blues song called Crossroad Blues." "I like a girl who knows her music," Robertson said admiringly. "Anyhow, I got a split. But y'all come by the Hilton after your set's done. Ask the front desk for Mr. Brown. They'll send you right up to me." He headed toward the exit, and Jaina stared around at all of us. "What the fuck just happened?" I called out after Robertson. "I'm Cassie, by the way. You can ignore me. I'm just some tall chick at the bar." Bobby winced. "Sorry about that, Cass. I waved her off. "It's okay. I really am just some tall chick at the bar. You guys are the ones that are having a 4 a.m. meeting with John Robertson." "Okay," Jaina said slowly. "So that did just happen. I need another fucking cigarette. That was really him?" Now Bobby was practically bouncing. "Yes! And he really wants to talk to us about being in the backup band on his next CD." "Wait a sec. I thought he had a band," Chet said. I shook my head. "He's like Dylan. He goes through bands like underwear. In fact, he toured with the Grateful Dead as his backup band before Dylan did. I saw them together in San Diego when I was a kid." Ginny just stared at me. "You must have been only 4 years old." I laughed. Blame it on the same post-hippie parents who named me Castor and my twin brother Pollux. They never passed up a chance to see the Dead, even carting along two little kids. And getting John Robertson was just icing for them. As it turned out, the show sucked rocks, and I don't think that tour lasted more than a couple of months. "But yeah." Bobby gulped down the rest of her pint of beer. "He goes with a different band all the time. I think it's usually just session guys, but I'm not sure, honestly." "This is fucking huge," Jaina said. "Shit, this could be the break we've been waiting for." Chet stared at the others, those muted by the plastic sunglasses he always wore. Seriously, after a year, and I still had no idea what color his eyes were. "We been waiting for something?" Bobby shook her head. "Not we 1812. We, me and Jaina." At that, Chet just nodded. Jaina and Bobby had been best friends since they were 6, and had dreamt of musical stardom pretty much for that entire 2-decade period. Ihor brought over another beer for Bobby, which she hadn't asked for, but grabbed nonetheless. He also had a tequila for Jaina, and a bottle of Corona for Chet. Bobby raised her glass. "To fame and fortune." We all clinked our glasses. After I gulped down some of my amber beer, I added, "And hey, don't forget the little people when you get all rich and famous and stuff." Jaina grinned. "No worries, Zukav. We're going to need groupies, am I right?" I slapped her playfully on the arm. "You're not my type." "Speaking of which, where is Demetrijan?" I rolled my eyes. Special Agent Rance Demetrijan of the FBI and I were not dating. Exactly. Sure, he always sat with me when he was able to make it down from Miami to see 1812, and he always dove with me when he came to see Clips, and there was that one time I rescued him from being killed by a Nixie where I got to see him naked and give him mouth-to-mouth on the boardwalk. But we weren't dating. Really. "I got a text from him earlier," I said. "He stuck late at work, but he should be here tomorrow night." "Good." Jaina grinned. "This may be our last weekend here." The next night, I walked in during the middle of the band's first set. Once again, the table by the ficus had an occupant, but this time, it was Rance. I sat down next to him and smiled. We weren't even going to try talking, especially since the band was plowing through a particularly loud rendition of Smoke on the Water, and signaled Adina, one of the waitresses, for my usual beer. Once 1812 was done with their cover of Deep Purple, Rance spoke up. A rumor has been moving throughout the bar that 1812 was approached by a very famous musician about the possibility of their performing on his long-awaited next CD. That's our special agent Demetrigian. Tall, dark, handsome. He does have the cutest cleft chin, and never uses 2 words when 10 will do. Yep, got to meet him. Well, for small values of meat. I was standing next to the 4 of them when they met him, and they even talked to him for a second, but we were never formally introduced. The band was introducing themselves, which gave us a bit of time to talk, followed by Jaina doing the piano intro to Jethro Tull's Locomotive Breath. Once the song kicked in properly, though, it was back to nodding, smiling, and sipping our drinks. They ended the set with Marvin Gaye's Don't Do It, and afterward they came off the stage. Just like last night, Jaina ducked outside to smoke, Chet headed to the bathroom, and Bobby and Ginny came over to me. After the 2 of them grabbed 2 other plastic chairs from other tables and put them at our little round table, I asked, "So, tell us, how'd it go last night?" Bobby closed her eyes and sighed. "We can't tell you." "What?" "We signed an NDA," she added quickly. Before I could respond to that, Rance held up a hand. "Say no more, please. The last thing I would ask you to do is violate a non-disclosure agreement. In fact, as a federal agent, it's my responsibility to ensure that you don't." "We do need one thing from you, though," Bobby said, "and you gotta tell us before Jaina and Chet get back." I gulped some of my beer. I was getting a very bad feeling about this. Leaning forward and staring at me intently, Bobby asked, "Did you, feel anything from Jack?" I rolled my eyes. "Jesus, Bobby!" Ginny regarded Bobby with an expression that almost looked like pity. "I warned you that she would not necessarily..." Waving a hand back and forth, Bobby said, Yeah, I know, but I had to ask. After Russ..." I gulped more beer. Recently, during that whole mess that served as my introduction to Loki, Ginny, Odin, and the mystical nature of Mayor Fred's ficus, I had also found out that I'm a Norse fate goddess, a Dis. If nothing else, it explained why I've always been such a damned weirdness magnet. It was also something that Bobby knew because I told her, and Ginny knew because she was already a Norse goddess her own damn self. I didn't think Chet would get it, and I didn't think Jaina would keep her mouth shut about it, so I didn't tell them. "Put it this way," I said after swallowing the beer. "He looks that young some way other than a glamour." That much I knew. I wasn't altogether clear as to what exactly being a fate goddess entailed, but one thing I did know I could do was see through glamours. It was how I discovered that Russ, Jaina's ex-fiancé, was actually a water elemental. And not getting any weird-ass vibes off him. Okay, good. Bobby sounded a lot more relieved than she probably should have, but I didn't pursue it, since Chet came ambling over. "Anyhow," Ginny said quickly, "we shall be taking a pause from our performances here starting next weekend." "You know," I said with a smirk, "the last time you guys took a break from playing Mayor Fred's, the replacement band almost destroyed the world." Bobby grinned. "Yeah, but what are the odds of that happening twice? Besides, that was because we couldn't nail down a drummer. This time, we'll be living the high life and..." She stopped herself. Again, I rolled my eyes. "You can't even tell me where you're recording this CD?" Rance put a hand on mine. "You really should go easy on all of them, Cassie. NDAs these days have a tendency to be extremely thorough." "It's some bullshit," Chet said. "Can't even say that we're recording nothing." "Chet, I was standing right here when he made the offer." I shrugged and pointed at the bar. "Well, okay, over there. But you know what I mean." Jaina had come back from sucking nicotine and was grinning from ear to ear. "What it means, Zukav, is that we are going places. We just can't tell you what those places are." I had to admit, I was glad to see a smile on Jaina's face. She'd been pretty down since the business with Russ, during which she almost became cursed to fall in love with him so badly it'd kill her. After a succession of brief, stupid relationships, Jaina had really found true love, even if it was helped along by magic, and then had it yanked away from her. She'd been even more sullen than usual. So maybe 1812 going somewhere beyond Key West clubs would get her groove back. The next few weeks could charitably be called crazy. Noah had a family reunion he had to go to, which meant I was pretty much running every dive at C-Clips for a week. Plus, it was the August busy season with vacationers, students getting in their last dives before the school year started, and so on. I pretty much woke up, went to C-Clips, led as many dives as I could stand, and went back to the Bottroff house and collapsed. I didn't even get near Mayor Fred's for 3 weeks. Finally, Labor Day weekend rolled by, and on Thursday night, it was raining. Normally, this wouldn't be enough to cancel the night dives, but of the 7 people who'd signed up, 5 canceled. I gotta say, I never got that. I mean, if the rain was heavy with nasty winds, then we canceled the dive. But light rain, the type we got every 3rd day in Florida anyhow? What's the big deal? I mean, come on. These are people who are about to go... are these people who are about to go scuba diving worried that they're going to get wet? So I convinced Noah to take the 2 who were willing to brave the drizzle, and I went to Mayor Fred's, figuring it had been almost a month, they had to be done recording, right? Apparently not. Since I walked into Mayor Fred's, with the tarp on top to keep the rain off the bar, to see 3 guys on the stage. One had an acoustic guitar, one had an electric bass, and one sat at a minimal drum kit. All 3 were wearing white t-shirts with pictures of sea anemones on them, black shorts, and, I swear I am not making this up, hot pink flip-flops. That was strike 1. Strike 2 was the fact that I walked in on them covering Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. I know some tourists like it, but they can always go into one of the damn karaoke places and sing that crap themselves. And then strike 3. Good evening, Frere Freds. We're friends anemones, and this next one is a request from Martha. Okay, that was actually a pretty clever pun, so I gave them a pass on their name. But then the next song was also Jimmy fucking Buffett, A Pirate Looks at 40, at which point I ran screaming from the bar before Adina could even catch sight of me to get me my beer. I bumped into Ginny as she was striding down Green Street toward the bar, her red hair covered by a big floppy hat to protect her from the rain. Ginny! Oh, thank Christ. Please tell me you guys are coming back soon. Mayor Fred's is turning into a Parrot Head bar. Ginny frowned. I'm sorry? Shaking my head, I said, the guys in there seem like a Jimmy Buffett cover band. I had to get out before it's 5 o'clock somewhere started and I'd have to kill someone. Well, actually, I was coming here because that lovely woman at the inn where you live said you were here. I need your help. My turn to frown. With what? The rest of the band. Since we got back from Mississippi, they've been wrong. I stared at her for a moment. I was remembering that bad feeling, the one that had hit me the last time I'd seen 1812 play. Come on, let's go somewhere to talk out of the rain. We headed down Green Street to Duval Street. You recorded in Mississippi? She nodded. In a town called Hazelhurst. Mr. Robertson, Jack, has a private studio there. We land-sharked our way through the tourists on Duval until we reached M's, an eatery with the best fries on the island. As we walked, I said, I haven't heard from Bobby at all. I figured I'd get texts or something. There was no time to communicate outside the studio except to order food deliveries. Jenny sounded more than a little grumpy. Jack worked us very hard the first week, making sure we rehearsed all through the days and evenings in order to learn the songs. We arrived at M's and walked up the stairs. The place was crowded, but the tables on the balcony were free. The rain was letting up, and the chairs out there had umbrellas over them, so we took one of them. I was already damp from both seawater and sweat, and Ginny never seemed affected by weather. We sat down, hunched under the umbrellas, and ordered conch fritters and fries and a beer each. Once we were settled, Ginny went on. The second week, we laid down the tracks. Chet and I put down the bass and drums first, and then we added everything else later. She shook her head. He seemed fine with my drumming, but he kept making Chet do things over. That was nothing compared to what he put Bobby and Jaina through. Constant retakes. He finally freed us on Monday, and he said he would be doing post-production work for a fortnight. The beers came, and Ginny practically drank hers all in one swallow. I openly gaped. She's usually a sipper. We agreed to all go home and sleep for a day, just to be away from each other, but to meet at Mayor Fred's on Wednesday to discuss restarting our weekend gig. Nobody showed but me. She sighed. I went to Bobby's house, to Chet's boat, and to Jaina's apartment, and they were all exactly the same. Exactly the same how? Lethargic. Unwilling to move from their chairs. From Chet, I almost expected that. Possibly even Jaina, but Bobby? I nodded. Bobby Malevsky was a bundle of energy, and even when she was exhausted after a dive or a gig, she was back to bouncing around an hour later. That's not the worst part, though, Ginny said gravely. When I mentioned that we had to meet at Mayor Fred's to discuss returning, they all said the same thing, that they did not wish to. I choked on my beer. Say what? None of them wished to play music anymore. At all. Not at Mayor Fred's, not with 1812, not again. That's crazy. Chet, well, who the hell knows what goes through Chet's head at any given time. But Bobby and Jaina have been playing music together since they were kids. Jaina's quit 1812 twice in the last 4 months, and Bobby was apoplectic both times. I know. Jaina even said she was not returning from her leave of absence at her teaching position. My eyes widened. While the 4 members of 1812 made decent money playing Mayor Fred's, it wasn't enough to live on generally. Bobby worked at her parents' store. Chet gave tours on his boat, and Jaina was a music teacher for kids. I had no idea what Jenny did for food and shelter and was kind of afraid to ask, but Jaina loved teaching kids. She was also a virtuoso musician. I couldn't believe she'd give that up. I decided I needed to see this for myself. Jaina lived closest. She was the only one who lived on Key West itself, in an apartment on Eli Street. So after dinner, we went to the Botroff house and retrieved Rocinante, my beat-up 1985 Ford F-150 pickup truck. It was only a 5-minute drive to Eli Street, and the building had parking spaces in front. Of course, they belonged to people who lived there, but half of them were empty, and I doubted we were staying all that long. Jaina answered the door looking half asleep. She was wearing a black Sex Pistols t-shirt and black shorts, a cigarette dangling from her mouth. Hey, Zukav. Hey, Blake. Come on in, I guess. We followed her into her apartment, which had a single path through the piles of clothes, empty cigarette boxes, papers, CDs, jewel cases, half-empty glasses, and other stuff on the floor that led to a desk that had her laptop on it. She sat down at the computer chair and rested her cigarette in a Conch Republic ashtray. I've been checking out some jobs online. Playing dumb, I said. I thought you had a job. Just not into the music thing no more, you know? Need to try something different. Then she yawned. Yeah, I go take another nap first. Music had been Jaina's everything for her entire life. Bobby once uploaded a video to YouTube of Jaina playing the Beatles' Blackbird on an acoustic guitar at the age of 7. So, what? You're quitting 1812 again? More like breaking up. She shrugged. Happens, I guess. Had a good run. Now it's over. We stayed for a bit longer, making stupid chit-chat, but Jaina was falling asleep before our very eyes, so we excused ourselves. Ginny hit me with a see, look. Yeah, I muttered. Let's go to Kauki. Bobby still lived at home with her folks and some of her brothers. One of those brothers, they all dived at sea cliffs, but I honestly couldn't tell them apart as they were all blonde-haired and blue-eyed like their sister, and they all overused words like dude and whoa. Answered the door. Hey, Cass, what's up? Is Bobby around? Grinning stupidly, he said, dude, you guys getting a wiffle ball game going? I'll see if she can come out to play. He probably thought that was funny. He was alone in this. We waited outside while he fetched her. Bobby was even more bleary-eyed than Jaina had been. She was wearing her usual outfit of plain white t-shirt and blue shorts. Seriously, it was all she wore. I think she had an infinite supply of them in her closet. Sup? Just wanted to see how you were doing, I said slowly. You okay? Been sleeping all day. Need to go back to bed. So, I started playing dumb again. When's 1812 going to be back at Mayor Fred's? I mean, me and Rance have to have something to do on the weekends, right? I grinned gamely. Nah, done with that. Don't want to do music no more. Gotta get to sleep. She wandered off, shuffling like a zombie toward the interior of the house. The brother came back to the door, the stupid grin replaced with a scared frown. Dude, I don't know what's wrong with her, but it's bad. I ain't never seen her like this. Only time she woke up was to put her guitar on eBay. I actually did a double take at that. What? For real, dude? I put a bid on it just so it'll stay in the house, you know? For when she changes her mind, but... Dude, she's got me seriously worried. We'll see what we can do, I said lamely, considering I had no bloody clue what to do. We headed back to the truck. I whipped out my smartphone. Who are you telephoning? Rance. Hope he's still in his office. After I hit his work number on my frequently dialed menu, I put the phone to my ear. He hadn't been at Mayor Fred's, so I was hoping it was because he was stuck in Miami working late. Special Agent Demetra... Oh, hi there, Cassie. Good to hear from you. How are you doing? That last was probably added when he finally looked at the caller ID. Not so hot. I gave him a brief précis of 1812's travails. I assume you're sitting at your desk with its computer on it? Well, yes, of course I am. Do you need me to look something up online? Yeah. I took a breath. First, I need you to find out who the musicians are who played on John Robertson's recent CDs and find out where they are now. Do you think he did something to 1812? Is this something you're sensing as a diss? I shook my head, even though the gesture was meaningless over the phone. No, but do I really need it? I mean, Jane is talking career change and Bobby's selling her guitar. Whatever's going on here, it is not natural. Actually, it's completely natural for people to undergo traumatic experiences and change their lives entirely. I've seen it plenty of times with families of murder victims. All right, fine, maybe it is that, but why didn't it affect Ginny the same way? Ginny just stared at me. Okay, dumb question, but still, I don't like it. Just look into it, okay? Fine, I've got tomorrow off, so I signed up for the afternoon dive. I'll meet you tomorrow at C-Clips. The next morning, I woke up to a text message from Rance. This is bigger than we thought. I'm driving down to meet you at B&B at 11:15. No, you're not conscious before then. Rance knew me way too well. I woke up at 11 pretty much every day, and the first thing I needed after a shower was a cup of coffee, usually in the garden in the midst of the Bottroff house. Every morning, Hawaiian Kona was served, a.k.a. the nectar of the gods. By the time 11:15 rolled around, I had showered, climbed into my bathing suit, and stumbled down the stairs from my cottage on the B&B's grounds, and walked toward the table where breakfast was laid out. I'd also received and replied to a second text, this one from Kara. It turned out her cast was off and she was ready to run dives again. That meant I had my life back. Rance was sitting in one of the white wrought iron chairs that was off to the side, away from the guests who were congregated around the picnic table. I poured some of the blessed coffee into a mug, clutched it for dear life, and went over to sit on the stool nearest him. Rance had a look on his face that I just did not like. Okay, look, I found some things out, but it wasn't anything I could transfer to a tablet or print out or anything. I mean, I could have, but I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to, because I didn't like where any of it was going, and I didn't have probable cause for the searches I was doing within our databases, so I kind of need there not to be a trail of what I tried to hang in. I really did, but I'd only had 2 sips of coffee. Rance! I snapped. The point. Sometime this decade. Right. He took a deep breath. I checked into everyone who played on Diamonds in the Rough, which came out 2 years ago. None of them have any music credits on any albums since, except for the bass player, but that was a live CD of a concert from 2002. Turns out they were all in a Chicago-based band called Uptight Garage, but all of the band's live performances in the Chicago area clubs predate the recording sessions for Diamonds, and they haven't performed anywhere since. In fact, the last time they updated their website was the day before the Diamond sessions started, and they used to update it daily prior to that. One of them committed suicide last year, and another checked herself into a mental hospital and is still there. Now, Robertson's previous album was Immoral Mortals, and that time he used another local band, this one from New York, called Waldorf Salad Astoria. Same deal with them. They didn't play any gigs after the recording sessions of the CD they played on. Their lead singer and guitarist both committed suicide. They were lovers, and NYPD chalked it up to some kind of suicide pact, especially since their families didn't know they were gay. Can't find any records on the other 3 band members, which isn't exactly encouraging either. Despite having only had 2 sips of coffee, I was now completely wide awake. How did nobody notice this? All I can say is he's being very careful. The last 2 bands he chose were in cities that have hundreds of bands playing in clubs every night. No one outside of a few hardcore devotees would even notice if a particular band stopped playing in New York or Chicago. As for here, there's fewer bands, but the turnover of the customer base is massive. It's the perfect cover for... Then he trailed off and just stared at me. What? I prompted. See, this is the problem. I've got a pattern of criminal behavior, but no actual criminal behavior. This is why I covered my tracks and didn't save anything or print anything or leave any evidence that I did any of these searches. There's no crime here. Just a pattern that I wouldn't even think twice about, except... He shook his head. Except I know you. I've seen what you've done, and... I reached under the strap of my bathing suit where I kept my smartphone pressed against my left boob. What? I don't have pockets in the bathing suit. I called Ginny. Hello, Cassie. Ginny, is Robertson doing post-production on the CD in that same studio in Mississippi? Yes, he is. Why? You think if we go up there, you can get us in to see him? There was a long silence on the other end of the phone before Ginny finally replied. It's an 18-hour drive, Cassie. Jack flew us out. I doubt he'd fly me back. Then we'll drive it. You with me or not? A pause. I guess I'm with you. Good. Meet me at the Bottroff house in an hour. Pack light. I ended the call and hit C-clips on the autodialer. It was a good thing Kara was back on dive duty because I was going to need a couple days off. Rance was squinting at me. What do you have in mind? I blew out a breath. No fucking clue. But this guy's already driven at least 3 musicians he's worked with to suicide, and I'm damned if I'm going to let him pull that shit on my 2 best friends. I first came to Key West after getting my master's from the University of California, San Diego. I then drove across the bottom of the country, what I jokingly called my I-10 tour. Using that interstate highway, I hit a bunch of places before going south on I-75 to the Florida Turnpike to Route 1 to Key West. A year later, I was finally going back the way I came. And I had to say that the Florida Panhandle was even more boring this time. It didn't help that I was worried about my friends. It didn't occur to me until we went through Gainesville to ask if Ginny even knew how to drive. You never knew what she knew and didn't know, being a Norse goddess and all. Luckily, she did, and she took over part of the drive through northern Florida. I spent that time on my smartphone trying to find out what I could about John Robertson. I was surprised at how little there was in terms of actual substantial information. Everything was press release hype or canned stories or bland interviews with cliche answers to everything. And then one bit from an old Rolling Stone interview that had been archived on Robertson's own website caught my eye. He was asked why, when he listed so many blues players as influences, he never covered any blues songs, and said in reply, "I did my time playing the blues for a long time. I'm playing other stuff now. Moving on, you dig?" Except Robertson had never played the blues. I checked his entire playlist from his debut album, where he kind of came out of nowhere in 1966 with the single Saving My Soul, then opening for the Dead and for Hendrix before touring on his own. All his stuff was straight up rock and roll. Sure, some blues influence, every rocker had blues influence, but he said he'd played the blues for a long time, yet there was no record of it. That got me bopping around to look up old blues players from the 1920s to the 1960s. John Lee Hooker, Leadbelly, Sonny Boy Williamson, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Etta James. Holy fuck! Sounding almost panicky, Ginny asked, "What? Pull over, right now." Obligingly, Ginny hit the right turn signal and slowly decelerated onto the shoulder of I-10. Once Rocinante had come to a full stop, I shoved the display of my smartphone in her face. It currently showed a picture with a caption identifying the subject. "That's..." She shook her head. "That can't be. Add the sideburns. Looks just like him." We drove the rest of the way to Hazelhurst, Mississippi in nervous silence. I gotta say, I've got no kind of recollection of what the drive through Alabama and Mississippi was like. I was focused entirely on the picture I found, and the stories that were told about him. Stories I never would have believed if I hadn't spent the last year killing dragons, driving off Nixies, casting counterspells against gods, chasing down UFOs, and spending large chunks of my days with ghosts and immortals. I also have no recollection of how we got into Robertson's soul-saving studios, a name that I was coming to realize had a lot behind it besides relating to the title of his first hit. But there we were, standing in the engineering booth of a recording studio. Robertson and his sideburns sitting at a laptop that was hooked up to a big soundboard. The far wall had LPs, 45 RPM singles, CDs, and cassette tapes all framed. Every physical version of all his recordings was enshrined on that wall. Over the speakers, a song was playing that I didn't recognize, though I instantly placed the guitar lick as being Bobby's. It was probably something from the new CD, whatever it might be. "Virginia, I don't know what you and your friend here need, but I'm a little busy trying to..." "My name is not Virginia, as I told you several times during the recording. It's Sinkin. And Cassie and I are here to tell you that we know your secret, Jack." "Or," I added, "should we say Robert? Or do you prefer Mr. Johnson?" He just stared at us with those incredible eyes of his. "Say what? You two been hitting the reefer?" "Look, I know the stories, that Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil to become the greatest musician in the world. And if you did that, more power to you. Your soul, you can do whatever the fuck you want with it. But now, you're hurting other people, including my friends." "I ain't never hurt nobody, little girl," he said tightly. I noticed he did not deny being Robert Johnson. "Really? Tell that to the bassist for Uptight Garage. He committed suicide. So did 2 people from Waldorf Salad, Astoria. Someone else from Uptight Garage is in a loony bin in St. Charles, Illinois. She checked herself in. And I'm betting they all did it because you stole their music from them. Same way you did from Bobby, Jaina, and Chet." Now he just stared at me. Tommy committed suicide? His voice was much more subdued. I nodded. Last year. And 2 people from Waldorf? The lead singer and the guitarist. He looked away, shaking his head. Aldo and Swoop. They were such a nice couple, those 2. I was hoping they'd be able to jump the broom now that New York made it all legal. Didn't know they'd kill themselves. To my shock, I saw him wipe a tear from one of his soulful eyes. Then he turned to look at us. I swear to you both, I had no idea that had happened. Right, you'd already used them up and spit them out. I didn't use them up! Now he was back to being the bombastic rocker. I gave them a voice! They was all fine musicians, but they was toiling for shit clubs to a dozen people a night. Or they were your friends, just some tourist town wage slaves. Without me, nobody would have ever heard them. People heard them all the time before you came along. So yeah, it was just some little club in New York or Chicago or Key West. They still had audiences, and those audiences never get to hear them again. Pointing to his wall of fame, he said they could hear them anytime and every time. I recorded them so the whole world could know them. And all I took... He cut himself off. Their souls? Ginny said quietly. Not exactly. He took a breath. Yeah, I sold my soul down at the Dockery plantation like they said I did. And then they tried to take me away in 38. He shook his head. Stayed one step ahead of them demons for decades. They finally caught up to me in 64. Said I owed them more music. See, when they call it soul music, they ain't just whistling Dixie. Music has power. And my music gave it to them. So I made him a deal. I stay alive, but I give him more power. I shook my head. That's why you use so many different backup musicians. And why there are always people nobody ever heard of. But it didn't work on me, Ginny said. Yeah, I still don't get that. It's like you ain't human. She smiled. I'm not. Like you, I'm immortal, though I came by my eternal life more honestly, having been born to it. Whatever demons you did your deal with have no dominion over the souls of the Aesir. I got no idea what that means, Johnson said, but I guess the cat's out of the bag, huh? We know the truth, and we will share that truth with whoever will listen. Sure, most people will think it's bogus, but there's a trail. It's not the easiest one to see at first, but once Ginny and I expose it, you're screwed. He opened his mouth, but I interrupted. And before you try to threaten us, we also confided in a federal agent in Miami. If we disappear, he'll look into it, and he already knows what you did. I wasn't going to threaten you, little girl. He barked a mirthless laugh. I don't even know your name. Cassie Zukav. I'm a dive instructor, a B&B manager, an 1812 groupie, and one of the Disir. What's a Disir? A Norse fate goddess. Yeah, okay. He blew out a long breath and looked to the ceiling. Look, Miss Zukov, or Miss Fate Goddess, or whatever the hell you are. I ain't never meant to hurt nobody. I figured it was just a piece of their soul. Wouldn't nobody miss it? I found myself starting to feel sorry for him for some reason. Well, some of them didn't. They didn't all commit suicide. And I'm sure a lot of them went on to have productive lives. Bands burn out and break up all the time. But they should do it on their own schedule, don't you think? Yeah. And Tommy, Aldo, and Swoop. They was good people. They didn't deserve that. Ditto your friends. Jaina teaches music to kids. What happens to her students? How many more musicians will be lost because she can't guide them? It was twisting the knife a bit, but I was annoyed at myself for feeling sorry for this selfish asshole. Yeah. He stared at me, and I could see why so many people were mesmerized by him over the years. Including me. It wasn't a glamour. It was just plain old charisma. I can't give back what I already paid. But they ain't come for the delivery of your friends yet. I can give that back. Then what happens? Jenny asked the question simply, but she knew better than most about the consequences of actions taken by powerful beings. Probably best not to find out, said a deep, resonant voice from behind me. I turned around to see, well, something. For a moment, it looked like a young African-American man. Then a second later, it was a white woman wearing too much makeup. Then a Latin guy with a smirk. And on and on and on, but those were just flickers. Between them, though, I kept seeing a formless, smoky mass. The voice seemed to echo off everything in the room. You know the consequences, Mr. Johnson. If you do not provide me with the soul shards I require, we will have to revert to the original contract. You again, Johnson said. Funny, you don't look no different. Neither do you. At this point, all I saw was the formless smoke. What do you see him as? I asked. Johnson frowned at me. Same little man I met at Dockery. Ginny added, I see a young woman. What do you see? I shuddered. I'm guessing his true form. Glamours don't work on me, Chuckles. This is not your concern, creatures of the Norse. Your days are in the past. Smiling, Ginny said, my days, perhaps, but Cassie was born of Midgard. Besides, it became my concern when this jackass fucked with my friends. I took a step toward the demon. Regardless, it is ultimately Mr. Johnson's decision. The demon started to float, I guess, closer to Johnson. Whether to continue to enjoy a long and fruitful life, while giving obscure musicians an exposure they would never have otherwise had, or to die a painful death, followed by eternal suffering. I stepped between the demon and Johnson and thrust out a hand. Back off, asshole! You've done enough! The smoke brushed my hand, and suddenly the room lit up like a Christmas tree, while the demon screamed so loud it made my ribcage vibrate. Wincing, I bent over, hands on my ears, trying to block the demon's cries. Then the room dimmed again to normal. The demon was gone. What the fuck was that? I asked. My heart was pounding in my chest. Ginny, though, was grinning. What I suspected would happen. That demon was vulnerable to you because he alters people's fate. As a fate goddess, you may banish him with but a touch. Oh. I shook my head. Someone really needs to give me a fucking instruction manual for this. That was out of sight. Johnson was staring at the space where the demon was. That's some powerful mojo you got there, little girl. Yes, it is. I stared hard at him. So how badly do you want to piss me off? What I want... Johnson blew out a breath. Shit. What I want is to live a nice, long life. But I done lived a nice, long life, and because of that, 3 people are dead who shouldn't be. Besides, if I do what I want, you two will make sure nobody works with me again, and that little man will come back and take what's due. He gave me his flat smile. If I do what you want, same thing. So I guess I ain't got no choice, do I? The following Thursday, I walked into Mayor Fred's and saw a beautiful sight. 1812, back on stage. They were just tuning up as I sat down next to Rance at the table by the ficus. After I ordered my usual pint, Rance said, we got an alert just before I left the office tonight, and I made sure to read it over. John Robertson was found dead in his studio this morning. No COD yet, obviously, but everyone's assuming a drug overdose since he's an old rock and roll musician, and he's not one that has much history with rehabilitation centers and the like. Apparently, he just sent the masters of his latest recording off to his record company so the CDs could be pressed. Looks like it'll be released posthumously, which is kind of too bad. Though, I guess him still being alive would have been a good deal worse? I shuddered. That's an understatement. You're right, Rance. It was a pattern of criminal behavior, just not something that would be all that easy to prove in a court of law, since I can't imagine a U.S. attorney being able to prosecute someone for stealing souls. Rance smirked. I can safely say that not a single one of the AUSAs I work with would be willing to touch such a prosecution with a proverbial 10-foot pole. Adina brought my pint, and I held it up for a toast. To stopping the soul-sucking Robert Johnson, or John Robertson, as whatever the hell he called himself. I clinked my full pint glass against Rance's half-empty one, and we both gulped down our beers. Then he stared at me with those nice green eyes of his. So, how did you stop him? Some kind of spell, or something else? I shrugged. I'm a fate goddess. I just reminded him of his fate. Bobby stepped up to the microphone then. We've got a couple of songs we'd like to start the set with, dedicated to a dear friend of ours. Probably the best friend 1812 has ever had. She looked right at me, and then slammed into a series of chords, 3 long, followed by 2 short, that blended right into the next set of 3. Chet leaned into the mic and started to sing. Woke up this morning, I was feeling around for my shoes. They followed Walkin' Blues with another Robert Johnson song, this time with Bobby on vocals, Hellhound on My Trail. They followed that with a rousing rendition of Crossroad Blues, with Jaina again singing it as she had that fateful night when a famous old rocker approached them to be on his CD. I belatedly realized that he was probably the one who requested that they do Crossroad that night. Now, Bobby said after the applause died down, we'd like to do something a little different. I don't know if you all saw the news today, but John Robertson passed away this morning. We had the privilege to be his backup band for what turned out to be his final CD, which is going to be called Old Man's Blues in a Young Man's Body. This is the title track. Jaina started a lovely blues piano riff, and then Bobby sang in a soulful soprano about a man trying to recapture the blues and failing. When the guitar solo started, I realized it was the same tune that had been playing when Ginny and I walked into Soul Saving Studios. When the solo ended, I held up my pint again. Rest in peace, JR. Rance lifted his glass. Around us, the crowd was grooving to 1812's sound as they played a rare original song rather than a tune they'd heard many times before. Amen, he said quietly. Amen. That song can be found both in Tales from the House Band Volume 2 as well as in the collection Ragnarok and Roll, Tales of Cassie Zukav, Weirdness Magnet, which also includes the title story, Ragnarok and Roll, which I had read previously, and it also includes a bunch of others. The story that was mentioned about Jaina's fiance, Russ, that story is called Undine the Boardwalk, which is also in Ragnarok and Roll, and also appeared in the Badass Fairies It's Elemental anthology. The story of the UFO that crashed in Dry Tortugas is one I have not actually told yet. I probably will someday. There's also a mention of Dragon. I haven't written that story yet either. The Ghosts and Immortals are seen in other stories. The Immortal is actually from Undine the Boardwalk also, and that character continues to recur. And the Ghost is Cassie's roommate, Captain Jeremiah Botroff. Anyway, check me out online at DeCandido.net. Check out my blog at DeCandido.wordpress.com. Read my writings on Tor.com. Support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD. And feel free to buy all of my books because they're awesome. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please stay safe.